So, the first time I ever experienced a little bit of like the gaming, big idea of gaming was I remember I was either 4 or 5 years old, and my dad got me a PS2, and it was Street Fighter was the first game that I ever played, and it was really, really fun. Like holding the controller, I remember holding the controller, mashing the buttons, seeing the characters do different stuff. I'm like, okay, this is cool. I remember he would bring he had to babysit me sometimes, so he would bring the PS2 to the barber place where he was working at. He was the owner, so he could do whatever he wanted. And then I just sat down with the TV and I would just like battle customers. 5 years old, just battling customers and just like beating them in every single round because I was like insane, or I was just really good at pressing buttons. And that was really, really fun. And so fighting games was my first game, but it's not my favorite game I've ever played. My favorite game I ever played, the first game I fell in love with really, was Kingdom Hearts by Square Enix. Kingdom Hearts. I'm still a diehard fan. Love the franchise. Hate where it's going, but I love it still. First game I ever played was that I remember was Kingdom Hearts 1. Absolutely loved it. Kingdom Hearts 2, best Kingdom Hearts in the series. I remember playing that, and there's this one scene when it's like Sora, the main character, versus 1,000 Heartless. And I was like, I think 8 or 9 at the time, and I was sitting there, I was like, oh, let's go! And I was like pressing buttons, and I was destroying everyone, and I loved it. And then it went away for a while. I played some of the PS Vita games, I played some of the Nintendo games. It wasn't as good. And I remember like in high school, I was like, yeah, I wish Kingdom Hearts came out with 3. I'm just gonna replay everything. So my friend had 1.5 and 2.5, which encapsulates all the games up to then, and I played all of them. And still in Kingdom Hearts 2, when you're fighting 1,000 Heartless, I still felt the same like energy I felt when I was a little kid, just like, this is so cool. And it's just like such a good memory I have in my head. I remember going. So my grandparents raised me for a little bit because my mom and dad were both working at the time, and my schedule would be get to my grandparents' house at 9 or 10, eat lunch, then they'll force me to take a nap. And after that, I would wake up, go to church. Immediately after church, went home, Kingdom Hearts time for the rest of the night until my mom picked me up. And that was like my schedule every single day. I remember in church, I would sit there, not listen to anything else, and just replaying either the theme song or like some battle sequences in my head, just over and over again, because it's just like so fun. And I've been a diehard fan since then. I've bought and played 3. Gameplay was fun, story was, and I'm definitely still gonna buy the PS5 almost solely for the reason for the next Kingdom Hearts game. It's because that's how much of a big fan I am of that franchise. So if anyone asks me what was the game that impacted you most in your life, I would say Kingdom Hearts, 100% sure.
Okay, so it's kind of a mixture of 2 people. One was my brother, the other one was my mom, and for 2 different reasons. So my mother signed both of her children up for chess club. So chess was actually my first game, and I actually competed in that up until middle school. Can't say I was very good, but I did place a couple times. And then the other part, which kind of comes into that, was my brother, who loved games, but he had a PSP. Well, I had been playing games for most of my life up until that point, but what really sold me on it was, ironically, Final Fantasy Crisis Core, which had a slot machine as the combat system, and it was absolute trash, but I loved the story. So that's my answer.
Who got me into games? I think my grandmother got me into games. She played Nintendo 64, the Super Mario Super 64, for anyone who remembers that. And she could never play water levels around me because I was too scared that she was gonna die in the game. And it just stressed me out too much. So my mother's like, yeah, no, he just gets too stressed when he watches that. Because I'd chew on my shirt and I'd come back from my grandmother and it'd just be completely ruined down. The first game I obsessed over would be StarCraft 2. I got into it. I don't remember why I got into it actually. But I've actually been grinding that for since 2015.
So let's see. It was probably my dad that got me started with gaming. I remember the first gaming system we got was a PlayStation 2, and he like always played games, so it was like really fun to play games with him. The first game that I played like myself was the Harry Potter game, like the Harry Potter 1, where you got to like be at Hogwarts and play around, and it was so much fun. And it's funny looking back at the like memes and stuff that people have created from that game and being like, wow, that looked terrible. And I'm so excited for the new one that I'm probably gonna have to buy a new PlayStation, even though I haven't had a PlayStation, I think, since that PlayStation 2. And then the other game that I played a lot with my dad was the NHL like hockey game, where you could play as hockey players and stuff. But like my favorite part of that game was that there were ATVs that would go on the ice, and then you would like hit around this giant soccer ball and try to score goals. And we would just play that for hours, like hitting the ball and running into each other and making the ATVs flip. And like it was just always so much fun to play that game.
So it was actually my dad that got me into video games. We had the original Xbox at home, and he loved racing games. He played this game, Project Gotham Racing 2, and he had the full setup. He had the steering wheel, the chair, he had the pedals and everything. And I was just like, whoa, that's so cool. This is a video game? And then he got me into video games by I was a little too young for this, but he got me a copy of Halo 2 for our Xbox. And then I guess that was really the game that I obsessed over the most, because I remember I was like 7 or 8 and I like beat the game on Legendary. And I love that game so much. You can ask like literally anybody, and it's like, yeah, Halo 2 is in like my top 10 favorite games of all time.
So it would probably be my best friend from 6th grade. She was obsessed with Zelda, like the whole entire series, just from her brother at the time, and she was like, you have to check this out, you have to check this out. And I never really grew up with video games around, because my only other sibling is 12 years older than I am, and she was never into that kind of stuff. So I went over to her house one day, and I think the first game that we played was Twilight Princess. I just fell in love with like the graphics, and seeing as it was like my first introduction into ever playing a video game like that, I just kind of fell in love with the concept of controlling a character and you get to go through a whole entire storyline that would never exist in real life. So
my first experiences with gaming were definitely when I was way too young to like pinpoint exactly where I started becoming like obsessed with gaming. But I definitely have to say it was my older cousins that were in high school at the time that brought over Smash Bros. 64, Super Smash 64, and we would play that all the time, and it was some pretty good memories playing that. But I remember playing most of my early childhood games on the PlayStation 2, and the one game that I definitely remember obsessing over was Sly Cooper 3. I think it's Among Thieves. It's not Band of Thieves. Band of Thieves was 2. But I remember playing all 3 of the Sly games obsessively because they were just so fun. And I love the incognito kind of games, the sneaking around kind of games. So like Assassin's Creed is what I eventually jumped into. But yeah, that's those were my 2 big first games, was Super Smash Bros. And Sly Cooper.
When I first started playing games, like my earliest memories of gaming is I was really young. I had my N64, and like the very first game I played was Super Mario 64. I had a ton of time. I put a ton of time into that game, and I just loved every second of it. Like over time, I come back and replay it every so often to the way I like still appreciate like the game design and the way that it was made, like with the technology they used back then. It's still pretty impressive, like the things that they did on that system, everything they could put into that little cartridge. But that was one of the first things. That was one of the first gaming memories that I remember.
Like I can remember growing up and I think my parents had got it from my sisters because my sisters are quite a bit older than I am. But we had an Atari. I can remember playing games on the Atari. Like there was a Spider-Man game on it that was really hard. But my Uncle Bill, my dad's brother, came and spent like a week with us. And my Uncle Bill was my godfather, and he enjoyed spoiling me. And even though my father did not want me to get a Nintendo, my Uncle Bill took me to Toys R Us and bought me a Nintendo while he was there. Like he and I just went and had a day, and I came home with a Nintendo, and it royally pissed my dad off, and it was kind of funny. But I can remember, so you know, the games that I played for a long time on the original Nintendo were Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers. But I had an after-school program that I would go to, and every, like I think one day a week we would have a video game afternoon, and that's when I really started to get into gaming, because it was something that like my friends that I was in this program with, we would like talk about. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get back there and pick up where we left off. So two of the games that we played there were Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy, and then a game called Dragon Warrior. And Dragon Warrior was the first game that I became obsessed with. And I didn't have it at home, so I could only play it at my after-school program. Until it was Christmas of 1990, I think. Maybe 89. We actually spent Christmas in Connecticut with another brother of my dad's, and my parents got me Dragon Warrior for Christmas that year. And I remember being at my cousin's house, my uncle's house, getting this game, and then like being so excited for it, but not being able to play the dang thing until I got back home, because it was like my cousins didn't have a Nintendo, so it was like. So I can remember like reading the manual for Dragon Warrior over and over and over again, because that was the closest thing I could get to actually playing the game. Even though, and I had played it a lot at my after school program, but it was mine and I could play it. So that was really the first game I can remember really feeling obsessed about.
My older brother, he's about 8 years older than I am. So when I was in middle school, we started playing Xbox 360 together. First game I really remember loving with him was probably Gears of War. Kind of like the third-person shooter, but definitely Gears of War was the first one that I remember like really getting into it with him and like spending hours at a time, just like nonstop going at it with him. So that's probably.
So this is kind of a funny one. It's really my older brother who got me into video games for like ever since I was like 5 years old, and I knew the concept of what video games were. And the way that happened was that my brother took me to our local grocery store, and he took me to the little arcade machines. And my mom was like, fine, you can have 50 cents. You can go play one game while I'm packing up the groceries. I was like, cool. And so my brother showed me, it's like, this is the one game that I always play when we come to the grocery store. And it was the original Marvel vs. Capcom. And I was like, what's this? I see Spider-Man. And he's like, so it's basically you get Marvel characters and Capcom characters and they fight. And I was like, that sounds cool. So I would always main Spider-Man, Hulk, or Wolverine. And my brother would be like, you're a loser. You go for the easy characters. And I was like, what? and I would like just press the button. And I didn't know I didn't know where combos were. I didn't know what any of that was. I didn't know what tech was. And so that got me into the whole world of fighting games, and I really got back into it recently, back in high school, and it's been like a game changer. I'm not obsessed.
So I think it's hard for me to say who or what got me into video games. I think I was just kind of born in the time whenever video games were first starting to take off. Now, I'm not talking 70s, I'm talking like real video games, like good video games, not this Atari stuff. But, Xbox consoles and, first generation computers. And the first video game that I really got interested in was a game that I had no business playing. as like an 8 or 10-year-old was Diablo and Diablo 2 and Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction. And I played that game all the time.
So ever since I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I might be even younger. My memory can't go back that far as much as I wanted to. My dad would encourage me to play video games, and that seems kind of counterintuitive for a lot of classic parenting styles. But you know, my dad loves playing video games, so he got me into it as well. And he always tried to convince other people that there are positive aspects to, you know, first of all, spending time with your kids is something they enjoy doing, and second of all, just gaming in general. Like, it doesn't have to be an obsession; it can be a fun pastime, and it can be helpful for developing kids as well. So I attribute that to my father, and that was pretty awesome of him. And I look back at that thinking, man, I really appreciate that. And he also got me active, so it wasn't like a lot of people consider gaming to be very, you know, detrimental to your physical activity. For me, it's not like that. We'd play sports games and then go outside and play sports. so definitely that. The first game I can ever remember obsessing over was probably the Lego games. I used to love playing like Lego Star Wars. Oh my gosh. And I still once in a while will go back and just like fool around for a bit just to for nostalgia. But yeah, those are definitely the first games I remember obsessing over.
So I'm old. But I think the person who actually got me into games was my grandma, which is like super weird because obviously she's like was hella old before she died. But so we lived with them growing up, and she brought home an Atari, and she had like some experience playing like the old school Pong game on Atari. And so this was like something that she was excited to bring home from an auction sale of some other old person in the country. And so she brought that home, and that was really my introduction, was the original Atari console with like Space Defender and Centipede and like those old games as like a 5 or 6 year old. So that was my introduction to games, and then we didn't really have the money to have consoles or anything until like I was able to start working when I was like 14 or 15. The game that I remember playing on the regular Nintendo that I got really into was called Shatterhand. It's still like one of my favorite games. It's just like one of the old school, you go left to right across the machine or like the backgrounds and you fight stuff. But it was this dude that just like punched stuff, and you got different power-ups and stuff. But I loved that game. And then I loved Castlevania 3 because I'm pretty sure it was 3 because it was the one with the werewolf in it, where you got to like get him as a playable character. The first game that I ever like got obsessed with was probably Diablo 2. The Bale expansion, and I remember like that was the first game where I would be playing and then it was 5:30 in the morning and I had to go to school in an hour and a half, like just grinding to get weapons and runes and all that stuff, back on my dial-up internet connection in middle school.
It would have to be one of my neighborhood friends because he had an Xbox 360 and we would always go over to his house and play games. And then after I had been friends with him for a year, I got my own Xbox 360, and then that's when I really started playing video games like by myself and like learning what specific games I like besides Mario, because I had a GameCube and a Wii and stuff, but they just never grabbed my attention like that. I think the first game I would have ever obsessed over would be Call of Duty Black Ops, because I remember my father had one. He had an Xbox 360 and he had Black Ops. He wasn't much of a gamer, but he had one just because. And I was playing his console and I was like, what's this? And I loaded up the game and I saw the word zombies and I instantly was just like, what? So I tried to play it, except the batteries in the controller were dead. So I couldn't play it at all, and we had no batteries in the house. So I was just stuck with this like game I wanted to play that I didn't get to play for like another 2 or 3 years. Then I got a 360, and I bought Black Ops 1, and I played the crap out of zombies. I was a part of that zombies community for like 6 years. I love that game. It has a special place in my heart. I have a poster up there for it. Anyway, that's the end of that question.
So I guess. Well, so my dad always had stuff around. Like my dad was an early adopter for like a lot of technology. So I grew up with Commodore 64, Commodore D128, Amiga, Atari, all this 80s old school stuff. We just always had in the house. So I guess a combination of like my older brothers and my dad, just with having the stuff around. But the first game that I really, really, really obsessed over, I mean, there were some on the Commodore 64, like on the old computer, like Montezuma's Revenge and Altered Beast that were really, really cool. But the first one that I like loved and like, oh gosh, I can't wait to play it, was Ninja Turtles 2 on the NES. I was like in 4th grade, and I saved up my allowance money for, it seemed like 3 years or something. It was probably like, I don't know, a month or two, and then my mom paid for the rest of it. But that game, I was a huge Ninja Turtles fan when I was younger, and that game was just so awesome. The music still pops in my head every now and then. And yeah, no, I just couldn't get enough of it. Like, I just loved it so much. And then it spun out into a bunch of other games as well. But that was the first one that I remember like being like, really, really couldn't wait to play.